We start the first topic in our course of macroeconomics and monetary policy. And today we are going to define the role of money in the economy. For doing that, we'll take general equilibrium analysis, which means that in order to understand the role of money that it plays in the economy, we need to analyze the money market. We need to understand the demand and supply for money. And by doing this, we can model the functions and we can model the influence of money market. First of all, the main question which comes at the very beginning is money a good? We know that we analyze markets, we analyze demand and supply of different goods and services. For understanding and for drawing the money market, first of all, we need to clear out whether we consider money being a good. So can we apply the same principles of demand and supply and market equilibrium for money as we do this with any other good or service in the economy? So can we call money being a good? So first of all, what do we mean by saying a good? Looking at the definition, at a very abstract definition of a good, we can say that good is something of which an individual desires more rather than less, or less rather than more, ceteris paribus. Taking this definition, we can say that, yes, of course, we always then want more money, not less money. And by that, we could say that money is as any other good that is produced and sold in the economy. Though, even more, demand for some goods arises not because they or their services are directly used for consumption or production, but because of a social and economic environment which creates utility for them or their services. What does the sentence mean? It says that on one hand, we should think that a good is something that we need that gives us utility or satisfaction. It gives us utility because of using it. So we buy bread, and bread is a good because we buy it as we feel hungry. We need to eat, and the utility the bread has is that we become full after eating it and we do not die. But the previous sentence says even more, that we buy things that are not so necessary for consumption, but we buy them because the utility we get by having it. And that utility comes from our environment, from our society, from people which are around us. And because we feel better if we have a particular good. I believe you can find many examples even in your everyday life that sometimes we have a car which maybe we do not drive, but which makes us to belong to driving people, to people who love sports cars, to in general to be admitted into a particular group of society. And money as well. Money that is not consumed directly. We do not eat them, nor drink them, nor do something that they disappear. But money has a value because we all agree on that. Our money has a value because we agree that we can exchange it to any other good or service. And that's why we need it. So we can treat money as a good. Besides money, there are also other types of goods in the economy. So when we analyze the markets, this is the most typical approach we take. We analyze the market of commodities or goods. When we analyze to buy and not to buy, when we aim to answer that question. Then we have labor as a good as well. When we analyze the markets to work or not to work or to have pleasure because of leisure. Then we have money, and then we have bonds. Bonds also could be considered as a good, as it also gives us some value, some perceived value. When bonds would be considered as all the non-monetary financial assets. We use that word bonds in economics in order to describe all the other financial instruments. It's not necessarily bonds, but that's one term in which we put all the rest. So we can say that money is also a durable good because of store of value function. So as we are able to keep it, to preserve it, to transfer it from today to tomorrow, so also money is a durable good. Now we are going to analyze how what is the role of money, let's say like that. And in our course, we are aiming to derive the demand for money function and to understand the demand for money, as well as to understand the supply of money. Taking money as a good, it helps us to include it into utility function, where utility function is the background of all the demand functions in different industries and markets. In this course, we are going to talk by using models. And on one hand, I'm aiming to you to learn some principles how monetary market works. On the other hand, my aim is for you to get acquainted with the building of economic models, with this mathematical aspect of economics. Before building a model, we should know what the reality is. We normally have some stylized facts which would describe us how the reality works, so that when we have a model, we could compare whether it represents these facts or not. And a good model should be in line with the facts. If a model contradicts any of them, it means it doesn't represent the reality well, and probably we should look for another model or do some adjustments. So what facts about money in the modern economy do we know? First of all, we know that commodities, labor, and bonds do not exchange against each other, but only against money. So even though we have different types of goods in the economy, how we said we have commodities, we have labor, we have money, and we have bonds. Commodities, labor, and bonds, they are not exchanged into each other. All three of them are exchanged only against money. The second fact is the income from the supply of labor or occurring in other ways is received in money, while the purchases of commodities and bonds have to be paid for in money. So this explains how this exchange happens, that when we work, we receive income in money, and when we want to buy any other good in the market, in the economy, we also need to use money. We also know that demand for money is positive, irrespective of whether the return on it is higher or lower than the return on bonds. From one hand, we always think, we put money and bonds as opposites. We say you can keep money or you can invest it in bonds. But despite the returns, the difference on return, people always need money. So this exchange of money into bonds doesn't happen only because of possible earnings. There is also something else which makes money always to be a demanded good. Also, the demand for money is positive, irrespective of whether the return on it is higher or lower than the return on commodities. Again, we say we need money for consumption, for buying goods, but it doesn't matter what satisfaction we can get from buying goods, we would still always need to have money, and we will not exchange all the money into commodities. So again, people will be willing to have some cash, all the time. For individuals, the demand for money is a function of total expenditures or of consumption expenditures, not of savings. So which means, or this fact says, that we can find a clear link between the demand for money and expenditure. Total expenditure or consumption expenditure doesn't matter so much. But we do not find the link between demand for money and savings. So even though people would be willing to save more or less, this doesn't affect the demand for money in a very clear way. And the last fact, the velocity of circulation of money is positive over periods that include both the receipt of income and the purchase of commodities, but is nevertheless not constant. So velocity of money, of circulation of money, is the speed, how many transfers a particular bond or a particular banknote or coin does. And we see that velocity is always positive, but it's never constant, which means that it circulates as well. And we have periods of very high velocity of money, and we have periods of quite low velocity of money. Okay, we do have some facts. Now our aim is to put money in a in a in a utility function. I would say few more words before doing that. Um, so when we think about who needs money in the economy, we know that there are two main players. It is households or people and firms. So which means that if we want to understand the demand for money, we need to think about why do people need money, and we need to think about why do companies or firms need money. So we are going to split those two and to analyze them separately, because the aims of households and aims of companies are completely different. So starting from households, traditionally the demand for of households for any good comes from the utility function. We say that every person aims to maximize his or her utility by making different decisions. And so in order to understand how much money people would need, or how the demand for money of households changes, we need to understand what role money plays in the utility function. So first of all, we will have a utility function without money, and we try to model how it could work. So we take the two-period utility function, very traditional view. So which would say that utility depends on consumption today and consumption tomorrow, labor today and labor tomorrow. Normally, consumption increases utility as we are happy to be able to consume more, and labor decreases utility as labor or work itself usually doesn't give so much fun, and it's not so attractive. So we have, as we said, we have two-period function, utility function. So we say a person makes a decision to work and to consume in 1 year, and then to work and to consume in another year, aiming to maximize the entire or total utility. As we usually think about maximization of utility function, we think about maximization of consumption. So we can say that consumption depends on, or utility of both periods depends on utility in the first period, which comes from consumption in the first period, labor in the first period, and then utility of the second period, which depends again on consumption in the second period and labor in the second period. So you see what we have here. We have this component which is which shows the preference of second period or first period. So what do we like more? Does consumption today give us more value than consumption tomorrow, or is it vice versa? Usually consumption today gives way more value than consumption tomorrow, as I know tomorrow may never come. So that's why we have this coefficient, which would represent the preference. Also, in general, if we think about how to maximize our utility, we could say we should consume, I know, everything. Though it's impossible. It's impossible to buy everything. So usually because we have some budget constraints. So for the first period, the budget constraint would look like this. So entire budget, this is expenditure of entire budget. So we would spend budget for consumption for buying some certain amount of goods multiplied by the prices of those goods. Then we are going to keep some amount of money, and we are going to buy some bonds or do some financial investment. Uh, all this is dependent on our work labor income. A labor income. See, we substitute consumption by labor income, which is amount of work, amount of labor, and wage. We also have some money coming from endowment period, so we have some money which we inherited or something, and we have interests from the bonds of financial investments we did previously. So the logic is that we have some previous investments, we have some money in our pockets, we do work and earn some wage, and all this budget could be spent on consumption, on keeping money, and doing new financial investment. In the second period, we assume it to be a bit different. We assume that a person dies after the second period, which means that all the budget of the second period is spent only on consumption because nothing else matters. So in general, the budget income of the second period is similar to the first period. That is, we work and we get wage. We have some money coming from the first period, and we have some earnings or interests on the financial investments or bonds that we had in the first period. And so we spend all the budget on consumption. So this is the main model, so that we have utility function which we aim to maximize, and we have some constraint functions which say that our consumption cannot be internal, and as well as our utility cannot be eternity. If we solve that exercise, okay, I'm sorry, and so we can put those two budget constraints for both periods by summing them up, and that's more or less what we would get. So if we solve this exercise by aiming to find out what would be the money, bonds, labor values that would bring us to the highest utility possible, we would find that optimal consumption and labor supply solutions are independent of the existence of money in the economy. So the solutions would say to us that the amount of labor as well as the amount of consumption which would make our utility the highest possible does not depend on the quantity of money. And this happens from this mathematical perspective. This happens because we assume that returns on bonds are higher than zero. If it was zero or less than zero, then the solutions would be different. Though if we think about reality, that's normally what it is. Interests on bonds or earnings in financial markets, interest in financial markets is of course higher than zero. This is why we do them. This is why we put deposits. This is why we buy some insurance, put money in investment funds, because we aim to earn, and we assume or we expect interest to be positive, so that the value of our bonds would increase. So as this assumption is very realistic, the final solution doesn't seem to be that realistic. So this would mean that, or this solution would mean that economy does not depend on the quantity of money. So this would suggest us a super strong neutrality of money, which would mean that it doesn't matter what is the quantity of money in the economy is not changing. This would mean that monetary policy has no effect on the economy. What the central banks are doing in this case, is it really realistic? And probably it isn't. So which means that we probably need to look for another way of implementation of money in the economy, in the utility function. Any ideas why it does not work? The main idea or the main reason is that we did not assume when building this model, we did not assume that we cannot have consumption if we have no money. We cannot have bonds if we have no money. So actually we forgot this transactional function of money. And so in the next video, we will modify the utility function, aiming to represent this transaction demand for money.